Right, so when your last war ends with $20 billion in damages, your surgical strikes hit everything but their targets, and your military pride gets pounded into rubble by a barrage of enemy missiles, you'd think the smart move would be to step back, regroup, and maybe, just maybe, reconsider your approach. But the problem isn't necessarily them, but it's you. But for Israel's leadership, failure, rather than being a lesson to learn from, being a deterrent to repeating the same mistakes, efforts must simply be redoubled instead. Still, mere days after being handed their backsides on a plate by Iran's Operation True Promise 3, Israel's leaders aren't reflecting. They're plotting, and not subtly either. According to reports, they've just been caught red-handed scheming to stage a false flag attack on US territory and pin the blame on Iran, all in a desperate bid to drag Washington back into war against Iran on their behalf, warnings of Israel doing such a thing already having come out some time ago, desperate as Netanyahu is. The plan was foiled, thankfully, thanks to a timely warning from an unnamed third country. But the very fact that such a dangerous deception was allegedly in motion reveals a disturbing truth: that Israel's appetite for war is matched only by its contempt for international norms, and its faith that the United States will cover the tab, clean up the mess, and keep believing the lies. With Trump back on the scene barking threats, depleted uranium being thrown at Iran much as they did to Lebanon last year, and Netanyahu's government pretending the last disaster was just a dress rehearsal and they'll be ready for the real thing next time, one thing does seem very clear. The sequel to Israel's failed war with Iran may already be in production, and this time the stakes are even higher, and Israel have even fewer scruples. Right, so the 12-day war between Israel and Iran left a scar across the Middle East that should have prompted some sober reflection, some diplomacy and some de-escalation, especially on Israel's part. Instead, Israel appears determined to reignite those hostilities, emboldened not by success, they didn't have any. They failed on every single one of their stated goals of ending Iran's nuclear program and initiating regime change, but by desperation instead. Despite sustaining enormous losses, military, economic, and reputational, Tel Aviv is once again potentially laying the groundwork for renewed confrontation with Tehran. And this has been ramped up all the more by recent reports suggesting this effort has included a foiled false flag operation meant to strike US territory and blame it on Iran, a ploy that, had it succeeded, could have triggered catastrophic conflict and the US becoming far more vociferous in their involvement. This news has come out courtesy of Squawk Box and Tehran Times. Fair play, Iranian source, and revealed that Israeli operatives had planned a false flag attack on the US with the intent of blaming Iran. The operation, reportedly thwarted by an unnamed third country that shared intelligence with the United States and Iran, was a calculated attempt to provoke American military intervention against Iran during a fragile ceasefire. According to the report, the scheme bore all the hallmarks of Israeli clandestine operations: precision, deniability, and manipulation of foreign policy through deceit, but without any actual details as to what the operation was, nor who issued the warning. There is caveats to be had with this. This is not without precedent, it has to be said. Historical instances such as the 1954 Lavon affair, in which Israeli agents attempted to bomb British and American civilian targets in Egypt in order to sour relations between Cairo and the West. There have also been persisting allegations that the shooting of the 2 Israeli embassy staff in Washington just last month was also a false flag. Again, still to be proven in that case. These illustrate a disturbing pattern in Israeli history: Israel's willingness to engineer pretexts for war for their own ends that actually undermines all of its claims of self-defense and reveals a deeper, much more cynical agenda, that the perpetuation of their regional dominance through manufactured conflict is more important to them than peace. Especially right now when Netanyahu has failed to push back his corruption trial again. The timing of this, let's bear that in mind. So he needs another war. It's kept working for him up until now, hasn't it? But the US government is now fully aware of this latest deception should, in theory, constrain its future actions. Any American political figure, particularly Donald Trump, who echoes anti-Iran rhetoric now, when he absolutely is, of course, does so in full knowledge that a key ally has attempted to manipulate them into war. Of course, with so many other news outlets seemingly ignoring this story completely, though, no investigation happening by so-called journalists may mean there isn't much in it on one hand, but a cynic might figure it's being played down heavily due to the further damage such revelations might do to public perception of Israel, already decimated as that has been. The backdrop to this false flag plot, allegation, of course, has been the dramatic exchange of hostilities between Israel and Iran. Israel's preemptive strike, Operation Rising Lion, was framed as a decisive blow against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. In reality, it proved ineffectual and precipitated a far more devastating response. Iran's Operation True Promise 3 targeted over 30 Israeli military and industrial sites, including drone manufacturing facilities, intelligence outposts, and even a pilot's training center. The scale of damage inflicted by Iran was unprecedented. Initial Israeli estimates put the economic cost of the war, just those 12 days of it, at approximately $20 billion, a figure that includes both physical infrastructure damage and the vast expenditure on defensive measures such as missile interceptors. The Israeli government was subsequently forced to request additional US financial assistance, a humiliating admission of how ill-prepared it was for the scale of the Iranian retaliation, drastically underestimated as they had. Iran's strategic use of hypersonic and low-altitude missiles, including the Fatah-1, came as a massive shock to Israel and the US, especially in how it overwhelmed Israeli and US air defense systems. Notably, the US expended over $800 million, nearly $1 billion worth of THAAD interceptor missiles, roughly 20% of the global stockpile of those munitions as that was, just to defend Israel over the 12 days of that conflict. Yet despite this investment, Iran's projectiles struck their targets repeatedly, demonstrating that advanced Western missile defenses were no match for Iran's evolving military technology. Rather than acknowledge its strategic missteps, though, the Israeli government has adopted a posture of renewed aggression. The increasingly insane Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has publicly threatened to resume attacks on Iranian missile sites and nuclear facilities, claiming that Operation Rising Lion was merely a preview. Such rhetoric is not only irresponsible, especially given the scale of damage we have now seen confirmed done to Israel, but disingenuous and hypocritical with it. If, as Katz claims, as Trump has also claimed, that Iran's nuclear program was destroyed, why the need for renewed strikes on these sites? You've destroyed all of their nuclear facilities and their program and their enriched uranium, according to you. You've obliterated it all. So why the need, unless you're lying? European intelligence reports seem to bear that out too, contradicting those Israeli and American claims of success. According to the Cradle, Iran's enriched uranium stockpiles survived the attacks and remain intact. Furthermore, in response to the violations of its sovereignty, Iran passed legislation ending cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, effectively severing one of the few remaining links to nuclear diplomacy, blaming IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi, as Iran does, of destroying any trust or good faith they have in the agency, following those allegations of leaks made by the IAEA to Israel concerning Iran's nuclear program. But the hypocrisy here ought to be glaring by now when it comes to Israeli and Iranian nuclear assets. Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, and it maintains a clandestine nuclear arsenal that they deny, but is one of the worst-kept global secrets going. Yet it demands transparency and compliance from Iran, who still are a signatory state operating within the framework of the NPT. So the double standard is both legally and morally indefensible, and yet still world leaders do it, and increasingly by the boos and jeers of people worldwide refusing to accept such drivel any longer. Iranian officials have also, quite rightly, framed Israel's actions as violations of international law. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian described the 12-day conflict as a clear act of aggression under Article 39 of the United Nations Charter, and a blatant breach of Article 2.4, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of another state. He further warned that had Iran not responded proportionally, the conflict could have escalated into a widespread and uncontrollable war. Certainly they had a right to defend themselves, so there were fears with the conflict ongoing that it would still spread that way too. Ultimately, until Israel is reined in, that fear hasn't actually gone away still, I would argue. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi also criticised the ongoing ceasefire, stating that Iran would not accept any halt to operations that, as is the case with Lebanon, implied an uneven agreement, and certainly with Lebanon abiding by a ceasefire that Israel have abused hundreds of times over now for months on end, his comments have been interpreted as something of a rebuke to Lebanese President Joseph Aoun for letting that situation in his country persist, worsening as it is in the last few days. Meanwhile, Iran has intensified its internal counterintelligence operations, targeting Israeli espionage networks, and an interesting bit of info has come out bearing out their justification for doing so too. An audio recording has come to light that has been authenticated by the Washington Post that captured Mossad operatives threatening Iranian officials and their families with death unless they complied with demands to sabotage Iranian institutions. Western media has again largely downplayed this incident too, though, instead framing Iran's arrests and crackdowns of suspected Mossad spy rings in their territory as authoritarian repression, which is just surreal, but again all serves a narrative that shields Israeli misconduct from scrutiny. Further complicating the humanitarian landscape are reports, much more widely reported this time, it has to be said, that Israel has used depleted uranium munitions during its strikes on Iran. Depleted uranium is a byproduct of the nuclear enrichment process, so there's a bitter irony with Israel deciding to use this. I wonder where they got depleted uranium from themselves. They can't possibly be enriching it themselves for their own nuclear weapons, can they? No, I'm sure that can't possibly be the case. But it's known for its armor-piercing capabilities, this stuff, and it's been used in such applications. However, it is also known for its long-term health risks. International health organizations have linked the use of depleted uranium and the exposure to it to increased rates of leukemia, kidney failure, and congenital abnormalities, particularly amongst children. This is also not the first time Israel has used depleted uranium. Similar weapons were deployed in Lebanon in October of last year. The United States has also been widely criticized for its use of depleted uranium during the 1991 and 2003 invasions of Iraq, which has led to cancer epidemics in several Iraqi cities. Amid all of these developments, the tangerine tyrant that is Donald Trump has re-entered the debate with his characteristic belligerence combined with his unerring stupidity. Following Ayatollah Khomeini's declaration that Iran had won the conflict with Israel, Trump publicly mocked the Iranian leader and threatened renewed strikes just for that basis. His country was decimated, Trump claimed, adding that he had deliberately spared Khomeini's life despite knowing exactly where he was sheltered, he says, saying that the Ayatollah should actually thank him for this too. Trump has also halted what remained of sanctions relief for Iran and implied that any resumption of enrichment activities, still Iran's legal right under the NPT, we have to acknowledge, would trigger another US military response. So who needs Israel to plant a false flag if that's his attitude? Such threats not only undermine diplomatic efforts, but further validate Iran's decision to suspend cooperation with the IAEA, who would report it, even if trust between them and Iran hadn't been so badly damaged as it has. Israel's efforts to restart war with Iran through false flag operations, or alleged operations, the foul use of depleted uranium, and ongoing military threats represents a profound danger not only to the Middle East, but to international law and global stability as well. That the United States is aware of Israel's deception and continues to support Tel Aviv regardless is a damning indictment of its foreign policy priorities and Donald Trump's rhetoric. Meanwhile, he's just adding more fuel to a fire that has already burned too many, threatening war again himself. Iran's response, which has been militarily effective, diplomatically assertive, and legally grounded, has so far averted a wider catastrophe. But for how much longer, given Netanyahu needs another distraction fast now, and Trump appears to be sending out the same messaging? The alleged foiled false flag plot needs to still serve as a warning at the very least, though. But should the world continue to ignore Israel's provocations, the next war they instigate could be far worse, and on far weaker pretexts. Further warfare might be being mooted again between Israel and Iran, but Israel have already struck again in another way, just not quite in the way you might have expected. They've launched another attack on Iran, but this time there's been a little bit of a twist to it. So check out this video recommendation here to find out more about that as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.